Okay. Hello?
Hello.
Yeah, a little bit. Okay. Okay, so welcome everybody. Welcome to the first episode ever for La Crosse Thinker. And today we have our very first guest for the show, Dr. John Nunley from the Department of Economics. And we're going to be coming here to talk about labor market and how the artificial intelligence, automations is going to have an impact on the labor market. So thanks for joining us, John.
Yes, I'm happy to be here.
Cool. So I did some of the homework. I'm just going to read through them.
Sure.
So the first question I get is actually I recently read Andrew Yang about his book War on Normal People. In his book, he claimed that more than 50% of U.S. jobs falls in one of the following 5 categories. The customer service basically means you take charge of like phone services, and when people call, you basically answer questions. Retail, food service, truck driver, and manufacturers. So these are the ones we consider to be like the lower educated jobs. And more than 50% of the population are in there. And he claimed not that these jobs are going to be, not just that they're going to be replaced by automation. Actually, they have already been replaced by automations. 4 million manufacturer jobs just disappeared since 2004. And self-driving cars actually aiming to replace a large chunk of the 3.5 million truck drivers. So this is a pretty stunning number. I'm just wondering, with your research, do you observe the similar patterns? Is this true?
So, where to start here? So I guess the first thing is let's step back and think about the past. So I think there's always been concerns about technology or automation or whatever you want to call it, eliminating the need for work. And I think up until maybe now that it's sort of never panned out. You know, the example I always give in my classes is the ATM, the automated teller machine. When it first came online, people were concerned that it would eliminate the need for, say, bank tellers. But actually what happened is there's actually more people employed in banking today than has ever been.
Are they tellers?
Well, their jobs change. And I guess that's the point I'm trying to make, is that the technology substitutes for the completion of some tasks. In this case, taking deposits, cashing checks, things of that nature, and then frees up those workers to do other things. They're often called personal bankers or different things like that. Now, in this case, they're selling, financial instruments to people, credit cards, whatever else it might be, money market savings accounts. And the idea is that they're more of a personal banker, right? They tailor to individual needs and those types of things. And so I guess what I'm trying to say is that automation has eliminated certain tasks or jobs, that type of thing, but it's created other ones. Now, I think that there are, I can't speak to the book that you referenced because I haven't read it, but I can say that there are economists that have uncovered some things that are a little bit more unsettling about automation and technological advances more recently. And in particular, some work by some economists at MIT, they've basically shown that the technologies that are being adopted by firms tend to be just replacing the labor.
Okay.
And by its very nature, that's the point, is to sort of eliminate certain tasks. And so that's not necessarily a bad thing. But I guess the point I want to make is if you have a worker and they have a certain level of productivity, and you replace that worker with a technology that is only slightly more productive or even equally productive, if the technology is so similar productivity as the worker, and you trade those out, you've not really generated any, significant productivity gain, and therefore you don't get the wealth increase, and therefore it's not necessarily going to be okay. So my point about the ATM was it freed up the workers to do other things that created more wealth within the bank, and then so that additional wealth from the greater productivity of those workers ultimately resulted in branching. So more branches are out there in communities. And so and there's a personal banker or two at each branch. And so there actually is more people employed providing those services. But what if the technology only marginally improves the productivity of the worker? Then the productivity gain is small, and the welfare gain from that is likely not going to compensate for the displacement of the tasks that were being done before. And so I think that So the way to think about this, and this makes it complicated, is I think automation, AI, whatever you want to call it.
Automation is basically,
whatever,
people call AI every time they want.
Different definitions for different things. Is if it replaces work but creates a different kind of work, or complements the skill set of the worker, then we're going to get more productivity, more wealth, and everything will be okay.
Okay.
If the technology just substitutes for work and we don't really get that much productivity gain and therefore not much wealth gain, then we really have just lost out on wages and employment.
So do you see which track we are right on?
Well, unfortunately, I think we're more on the pure replacement track. At least that's what has been conveyed by the people that have done the research. I can't.
Kind of makes sense because if you think about the technology, like the first tech revolution, right? We have the steam machines and everything. We kill some jobs, we create new jobs, which you cannot even imagine, right? Yeah. Like more than 90% of people are farmers before, but now it's like, hey, I'm going to explain to you what is a computer programmer. There's no way I can explain. Yeah. But new thing will come. And
Well, I think a lot of this kind of goes with automation. I think that to me the risk to workers is the risk is on the tasks. And so if I try to tell my students this because I think it's important for them to know is that I always ask them what kind of tasks are most likely to be automated. And it's those that are the same over and over and over, repetitive.
Plus, you are paid a lot to do the repetitive stuff, even for like high-end jobs like law. Like probably you do very creative job, have a very solid training, but because the profit margin is so high, as there's a certain incentive for company just to write an algorithm to replace at least 40% of what you do, that would generate a lot of revenue, right?
Yeah, that's right. So I think one of the things that's happened is that the demand for tasks has changed, right? I mean, at least from workers. So two of the things that are really in high demand are, in particular, two sets of skills that complement each other, namely those of quantitative skill, which I know as a mathematician you can relate to certainly, but also what economists are calling social skills.
People skills.
Yeah. So working with a customer, or working with someone on your team at the company, the organization you work for, those two things are where we see the most wage growth and the most employment growth. And those things, those are skill sets that are, at least right now, are difficult to automate.
Yep. Like the first one is more and more intelligent, harder and harder for you to pursue, like the STEM, like a professor's job is harder. The second one is more about like, even though I can do everything with the machine by clicking, I prefer to talk to people. Right. Like even though I go to a restaurant, I can order everything without a waitress. But if I see a waitress, I kind of have those kind of conversation, like those kind of mood and everything just start to accumulate, right?
Yeah. So I think that social component, in fact, we actually don't see. So if you were to go back 10 years ago, some of the advice I would have given someone would have been to quantitative, math, data, that type of thing. And I think I'd still give that advice. But I'd also add to it that you need to do something about your communication skills.
Yeah.
And so these are very general things that, fortunately, I think the university does well.
We are constantly surprised like how bad students' writing and verbal skills are. It's just like, wow, all these kind of fancy formulas, you can't explain a thing, right? And you cannot write anything more than 5 pages. There are grammar mistakes. You cannot write anything unless you use some help from the software, right?
I think some students think I'm a little nuts when I say, being able to write a clear, concise memo to someone is a valued thing.
I see that all the time because like if you don't know how to write, basically it means you don't know how to think. Yeah. Right? It's like you tell me random 7 stuff, like not in order, not organized, and not in the like engaging way and logical way so I can understand it. It's basically okay. Even though you have the ideas, unless you can do it, it's purely like I don't need to know what you're doing. You just generate value. That's good for you. Otherwise, you need to communicate with me, right? Right. And so it seems to me like with all these kind of skills, do you feel like our education is responding to that? Or we're kind of behind, ahead of time, whatever? Well,
I mean, there's a lot of things to consider here. I guess one of the things I would say about universities is even though I think our universities are the envy of the world, I think that's still true today, we're also pretty slow to change as well. If you look at what a university was doing in 1975, it's not a ton different today. I mean, there's obviously teaching innovations and different things like that have come online, but I think we've been a little bit slow to maybe adapt to things. I actually think we don't fully know that. I think that's actually an interesting research area to see if curricula across the United States sort of delivers the skills that are required for the tasks that firms need. And again, I'm not saying that that's the point of higher education. It's not necessarily to produce a worker.
Yeah.
But I also am practical, and that's why a lot of students go to school.
Okay.
If some of them maybe come here to have a truly intellectual enrichment experience.
And we have different kinds of schools, right? We got tech school, we got
right.
University and everything. Even for tech school, like they need to respond to what the job requirement and everything we're having. Right?
Well, I mean, it's an important part of your life is your work. You're gonna every person going to school here is gonna a large portion of their life is going to be spent working, and so it's important. But it's not the only thing. I wasn't trying to imply that everything should be based on let's produce skills for the firms that need workers. Because I don't agree with that.
Yeah, I kind of observe the same thing with, the industry is actually moving really fast right now because every day we got new ideas.
Yeah.
And for internet especially, like you need to be respond really fast in a big scale. Otherwise, you basically got eliminated.
Yes.
Right?
Well, I think there's some research on STEM occupations by some economists, and they basically show, and I don't remember the findings exactly, but the gist of it is that people that end up working in STEM initially out of college, about a decade later, are not working there anymore. And I think it's because that field is progressing super fast, and so you're either ahead of that curve or you're falling behind it. And I think that's the explanation that's often given is that you can't keep up with the speed at which it's a little bit like econ PhDs. The people that come out today are going to be educated a little bit better. They're going to know more about the current techniques, the current data, whatever, the new advances, whereas old dinosaurs they graduated a decade ago or so are made, unless they've kept up very well, they're going to be behind those people in terms of where they stand, at least methodologically. At least in economics, that's the thing that's rapid is the empirical analysis in particular. It seems to be quite a change. Is just from a decade ago. The rigor that's required now is much greater than it was, say, 5 years ago, and then even
makes sense.
Yeah,
even you do programming,
it makes sense. I mean, it should be that way.
Yeah, like
as the data get better, the methods get better. The bar should get higher, right?
You learn the methodology. Like for example, programming a certain language. Within 10 years, nobody uses that language anymore.
That's right.
Architectures, they don't use it anymore. So that's why I actually heard a lot of people talking about a new lifestyle, which is called lifelong learning. Yeah. It's just like, okay, you work for 3 years, you think you can do the same thing for 40 years, get your check and go back and just, raise a kid and buy houses.
Right.
Probably that thing's not going to happen.
Well, that's a fundamental problem we have right now. A lot of middle-aged workers today, and disproportionately men, have done that same job for their whole career, and then all of a sudden things have changed. Not all of a sudden, but over the last, say, 10, 20 years, we've had dramatic technological change. We have globalization. Both of these two things have left many of these people out of work. And the worst thing is that their skill set that they possess at that time likely is kind of square peg, round hole for what's available. And and it's my view, and there's a lot of research on training programs, but one of the things that economists have done, I think, is trivialize that transition. If you take that hypothetical worker I just mentioned, say a 50-year-old man that's working in manufacturing their whole life, all of a sudden a robot takes their job, or alternatively, the job moves to Indonesia, wherever. Yeah. So either way, it's the same for that person. They just lost their job. And economists have called those costs of that worker having to transition cost. So it sounds as, I'm not big on attaching a lot of meaning to these words, but to someone, a bystander that doesn't understand, economic jargon, might think, oh, well, that's just kind of a little one-time blip cost, no big deal. But if you're that 55-year-old manufacturing worker who's been shocked, right, and lost their job, your transition costs are probably the rest of your life. Okay, until you retire, or maybe you're working well past what you had planned because you lost, all these kind of, they're enormous, is what I'm trying to say. In fact, it's been estimated that, the fall in lifetime earnings from an involuntary job loss, so you're laid off or your plant closes or they would use that kind of variation to study this kind of problem. You lose about 3 years of lifetime earnings just from losing a job.
The moment you lose the job, it's 3 years gone.
You basically, on average, you're forfeited.
You go to another job, you're like more junior, and then you need to actually make it back.
Yeah,
right?
And actually, a lot of times what happens to these workers, especially in the manufacturing sector, is that they lose their job at firm A. They're lucky enough to find another manufacturing job at firm B, and then they get hit again. And so there's in many cases, there are multiple, layoffs that one individual is experiencing. And so the cumulative effect of that is huge.
Is that because of like the whole manufacturing market is just shrinking no matter what? So there will be like 20% lucky ones. You find one, you find another one. But
so I think the type of this kind of goes to the things we're talking about with skills, is that you want skills that complement the capital that the firm uses. And so, just a simple example, take automobile manufacturing. I always use examples in my class because I think they're good ones. If you think about the way cars were put together initially by Henry Ford, people were cranking on wrenches, and, different things like that. And now the workers that put together the cars need to be able to operate advanced equipment, fix advanced equipment, calibrate it, all the stuff that they've got to do to make that work. And so the skill set that's needed is very different.
Which is more demanding right?
Yeah, more training is required.
Yep. And then give us like a lower proportion of the people who are capable of actually being retrained into this. Yeah, another thing I heard Andrew Yang was talking about is just like, you know, all those kind of retraining programs government provide. It's just like, hey, you're 55 years old. Mayo just lost your manufacturer job. Well, go to some universities. You can get some compensation for taking a coding class for like 4 weeks or something. It's just like, this is not feasible. Nobody's going to hire you as a programmer. Right. And after that, what do you do? Right.
Yeah, no, I think that some support for those, and we do have like, they call it trade adjustment insurance. I think most economists that I've heard speak about that suggest that it's completely inadequate.
Okay.
You know, and also, you know, a lot of people don't know about the things that are available to them. I mean, our tax code is very complicated, and
they actually usually go to law firms, right? The worst case, just like if you see a big group, like, for example, I heard like, you know, the truck drivers, if you got laid off and you have back pain, you should file disability claims. And once that's got approved, you got $1,300 for the rest of your life, which will actually discourage you to work anymore because you lose that thing right away, right?
Well, you bring up a point that actually I think receives insufficient attendance, attention. And so the rise in disability roles, some economists have pointed this out. I don't think politicians have quite got the message, though. A lot of times politicians want to, you know, when you want to try to trim the federal budget, they immediately go to food stamps or something like that. And when I think about that program, one, that feeds mostly poor children. I mean, so I have a moral problem
you have to do it. Yeah, you have money, you do it.
I think we need to do that. Just that's my own values, but the rise in disability roles doesn't seem to match with the rise in disability, right? So we're all of a sudden have more people on disability roles than are actually, at least the best we can tell, disabled. So that suggests some perverse behavior going on, probably along the lines you're suggesting, is that the incentive to try to get on disability is high.
You have downtimes, it's fine. I support you for 2 years, that's fine. But if like from now on, it's going to discourage you from going back to work again. Plus, like if I'm like like say 55 years who does not have the skills that market wants. Now, if I even find a job, how much that thing can beat like $1,300 per month, right? But of course, I'm not happy. Right. So I've actually developed those kind of social issues, psychological issues, and all that kind of stuff. I'm not happy, even though I got the money. Right. So
I do think this is something economists have finally begun to talk about. What's that?
Recently?
Yeah. In particular, be clear about work not being a bad thing.
Okay.
So actually, the typical assumption made in most labor economics models is that work gives dissatisfaction.
Okay.
You know, but I think economists are starting to come around to that. That was in large part, I think, an assumption that you could make, and that would make the analysis a little bit easier, maybe. You know, because I think it is more complicated.
You have to ground somewhere. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, that's right. But if you really think about it, I mean, yourself, you could probably identify with this. There are things that you do about your job, like think about writing a paper.
Yeah.
Maybe it's not so fun, especially the end of it when you're at the end of.
Or we can actually talk
revision.
about the 55 years like male. Like if you just go there like Henry Ford, right? You just crunch the number. You just do the wrench for like 8 hours a day. Certainly, it's not for fun.
Yeah, but I guess my point, and you talking about the paper, is when you're done with it and it's published. There has to be some satisfaction that you get from that. That it's not money. It's nothing like that. There's some, and it's a little bit like
utilities.
Probably utility. I didn't want to use economic jargon on the podcast, but as you get utility from that. But even that person putting together that car for Henry Ford by hand, it's likely that they probably felt some satisfaction from the final products that they produced. I guess that's my point. Is it?
Yeah.
So work and utility, I think, is more complicated than a lot of times what economists.
That's actually one thing which should bring my attention to, like universal basic income proposal. It's more about like if the whole country is getting rich, everybody got a dividend, like $1,000 a year, $1,000 per month. Let's just not worry about how you're going to be paid.
Yeah.
Like that's a big amount of money, right? Where are you going to get money? But more about like once you get paid by that, will that actually, you think it will free a lot of people to start to do things either like part-time instead of full-time to have more time, or work on the jobs which usually don't pay that well in terms of money, but do give you a lot of fulfilling, like, social work and everything, yeah. Or even just helping your neighbors.
Well, clearly those are potential benefits of UBI, universal basic income.
Yeah.
I guess from my perspective, I'm not a big supporter of UBI. And it's not because I don't think the government should be trying to help people. I think that the government wouldn't be able to be as generous as it needs to be for the people that need it.
So it's not practical.
Well, I think so I think the lesson from, at least from microeconomics research in general, is that targeting policies to the most disadvantaged will generate the biggest return.
Yeah, okay.
I mean, if just to give you an anecdote, I mean, could I, let's say the UBI was $10,000. Would I like to have $10,000 more? You bet, I would. Everybody on campus would. But if I ask myself, do I need that? The answer is no. Does somebody else need it? Yes. And so, if you give me 10,000 and you give somebody else 10,000, you could have given them 20. Me nothing. Is my point. And that would have helped them a lot more than it would help my family. It would help my family, but what I'm saying is that the gain, in utility or in welfare, whatever you want to call it, would be greater for the family in need. And that's my biggest criticism of UBI is I think you would have to, in order to fund it, one, I don't know how you'd fund it. That's first, that's a big issue, but let's just say the money wasn't the issue. It's like, okay, there's a limit to how much you can give everybody. And it really just doesn't make logical sense to give it to some people. I mean, you could maybe debate me and you, but Bill Gates doesn't. Like you can come up with crazy examples like that, or Harvard economics professors probably don't need a $10,000 UBI, and that's just going to reduce the generosity of benefits going to families that need it. And in particular, I feel most for their children because they're born into these situations of no choice of their own, no doing of their own, and then they end up paying a long run penalty for these for accident of birth, essentially.
Makes sense. So it's more about the universal part, like everybody share the same number is probably the issue, right?
Yeah, I think that's so what I would say is I'm for
basic income.
Yeah,
but just not universal.
Not for everybody, right?
Okay, makes sense. Okay, so we talk about labor market a little bit. Now I want to actually focus a little bit on the college graduates labor market, particularly.
Yep.
So do you think currently in the labor market of college graduates, there are like a huge chunk of college undergraduates are underemployed?
Well, there was some evidence right around the Great Recession, or not, actually the recession before the Great Recession. So we had one in 2001. There's some research that suggests that underemployment was a problem, and that can be defined in different ways, right? That can be defined as, you should be employed full-time, but you're part-time. That's a type of underemployment.
Oh, okay.
But another type is you have a college degree, and you're actually working in a job that has traditionally been done by someone with a high school diploma.
Yep.
And so there was evidence of so a lot of people don't know this, but even up until the Great Recession, the labor market was really not good.
Uh-huh.
So we really haven't had a thriving labor market since the late 1990s.
Okay.
And so the 2000s is kind of like a lost. I mean, some people call it a lost decade in the United States. I mean, that's often referred to as in Japan, where they maybe lost more than one decade.
Yeah, 1990. Yeah.
A lot of people think that that's happened here in the United States. And in fact, if you go back and look at the job statistics all through the 2000s, even though we were growing, 3% or whatever GDP growth, you had, maybe 100,000 jobs a month being created, new ones.
Okay.
And so
compared to what would be a healthy number? Like
300.
300. Okay.
I mean, so we're under what we consider good or a solid number, or even in the 200,000s is solid now. But we're well below that. And in many years, it was the net was month was 80,000 jobs and things like that. And so
what about the people who are entering the job market? Like it's because the baby boomers are the generation is actually kind of getting older.
Yeah, right.
So are there actually also fewer people entering the labor market?
Well, I think it's a good question. The number of college graduates in particular is still going up. I think it's slowed. That's one of the things that has been noted, in particular by Larry Katz and Claudia Golden, who wrote a book back in 2008 about this technological change in the labor market. So there's evidence that we had in the 60s and 70s, we had a huge run up in college completion. Not just that, but master's degrees, PhDs, law degrees, and that huge run up was primarily women.
Oh yeah, true.
Entering college at much higher rates, and I forget what year it was that the gender gap reversed. I mean, that's certainly here more women go to school here at UWL than men, and I think that's
actually a trend nowadays. It's just more women are in universities now. Yeah,
that's right. So there's evidence that the supply of college graduates has slowed a bit.
Okay.
But the demand for them has kept going up. And so that can, so a lot of economists think that's a big source. I think there's really no question about it, big source of inequality.
Okay.
It comes from what they call skill bias technological change. So
especially for this generation, right? The more skill you got, basically got rewarded way more than before. Yeah.
That's right, yeah.
Interesting. So back to the question then. Yeah. So you think there is a significant under.
I think.
Is that fair to say?
I think. Do some college graduates place below their skill level? Absolutely. I think that's probably always been true forever, and probably will be forever.
Yeah.
But I would, most college graduates. The unemployment rate for a college graduate is super low. 2% or something like that.
For sure. Yeah.
And even during the height of the Great Recession, barely. I don't even know if it got to 5%. Now, it is true that new graduates had a harder time during that period placing, which everybody had a harder time getting a job during that time. And so if you're entering the labor market at that time, you were in a bad spot. And actually, there's an interesting amount of research on that, is that's just being unlucky.
Okay.
Can have a big effect. So graduating college in a recession is not only...
Say you're a finance major in 2008.
Yeah,
that's right.
Okay. Not only. Yeah. So there's two effects that not only you'll start out at a lower salary level if you graduate in a recession, but not only that, if you look at the age, what we call age earnings profile, which basically plots your earnings against your age, it's shallower than somebody
should be going up.
It should be going up,
but it's
and if you look at
shallower.
Somebody that graduated just maybe the year before, but there was no recession, their earnings trajectory is higher, the intercept, so to speak.
Definitely.
And then the slope is steeper. And so they not only start out better, they have better wage growth over their life cycle.
Okay.
So, preventing recessions would be good for college graduates. So
it would be good for everybody, actually.
Yeah, it's good for everybody. But it's to your question about college graduates. That's the first thing I would say is I hope you're lucky that you enter in a good environment. If you enter into a thriving labor market, you're gonna get higher pay and better job.
So basically, it's part of your responsibility, but the responsibility is not fully on you. It depends on where the time is coming. And
luck. It's important, I think, to think about this. I'm not where I am because of everything I did.
Mm-hmm.
You know, I mean, first, I was born in the United States. That had a big effect on everything.
Everything.
Yeah. You know, so, I mean, yeah, if you compare that to, you know, being born in a poor country,
Yeah.
An African country, I had a much better start in life than most of the world.
Mm-hmm.
You know, the good parents that believe in education, you know, and so forth. There's that teacher, this teacher, you know, all those
Yeah,
people that
multiple
had
factors.
an effect.
Yeah.
And so and even colleagues that I've had here have made a big effect. So I think there's a lot of luck involved in just about anything, you know, whether it's college graduates starting their career or people like me and you.
Interesting. So let's talk about minimum wage.
Sure.
So I actually talked with a student right before I came here. He just kind of have the conflicting feelings about minimum wage. Mm-hmm. So can you give us a brief, like, why? I will play evil here, right? For me, if I'm a small business owner, right? So actually, I am. My wife is actually a small business owner. So if you raise the minimum wage up to a certain standard, basically we're just going to say, you know, we're not going to expand our store. This basically is going to restrict how much people we can hire. We simply it's just not worth it to hire out more people. Plus, you put like a health insurance requirement. You put all the kind of benefits requirement on that. So the only thing we can afford is actually a contractor working part-time. Yeah. If I make you a full-time employee, there are so much requirements that just, you know, if we want to pay you for $100, for example, we need to probably stock like $200 on top of that, just make sure that your insurance and everything is covered. Right. So, how should a small business see minimum wage?
As a cost?
It's just like.
So I, you know, what you just described is sort of a textbook prediction from a supply-demand diagram.
Oh yeah.
Right. Is that, you know? Well, it is, and you know, and I could comment a little bit on the empirical evidence here. It turns out it's quite mixed.
Okay.
Most of the studies tend to find pretty modest disemployment effects from minimum wage. But there's no question that, you know, most of what economists say is that, you know, teenage labor, you know, sort of young people that are working at, you know, at festival foods, bagging groceries and those types of things, those are the jobs that are ultimately lost. There is a study that just came out probably last year, I think, out of Seattle. And so what's interesting about Seattle is that they have a nice experiment there, right?
They have 15, I think, right?
Yeah, well, they're on a path toward it. And so, so some economists at one of the universities there got their hands on some tax data from the state. And so they were able to link up the workers with the firms and where they were. And so you could compare people that were not subject to the 13 an hour or whatever it is today, and you could compare those two kind of workers, and they ultimately found those kind of textbook predictions that as the minimum wage goes up, gliding up, that firms were cutting back on employment. Now that said, though, there are other studies that show it's more nuanced than that. There's even some studies that show more employment when minimum wages are increased.
And the reason is because they're more productive, kind of say, like, or better quality of people?
Well, that's so it's
kind of contradictory.
Well, so it really comes down to those, at least from a theoretical standpoint, from what kind of market it is. So are there many buyers and many sellers? If they are, that kind of textbook supply-demand of unemployment resulting from the minimum wage that's what we would predict. Okay. Now, there's another kind of framework called monopsony. And monopsony is where there's only one buyer, or oligopsony, where there's just a few buyers of labor. So an example of that locally might be Gunderson and Mayo Clinic and the market for nurses. Okay. Because you have two big employers that are hiring the vast majority of nurses in the area. So you might say they have some power. And they're able to set
almost close to
wages.
Monopoly, but they kind of sit down and have some agreement. Right?
So a monopsony is monopoly in the input market.
Okay.
Instead of market power in the output market. So that's the difference. But so basically, the gist of monopsony, without going into the details of the theoretical model, is basically just says that the firms have power to set wages. Okay. And so if the market's competitive, the market will set the wage, and the firms don't have any control over what the wage is. If they want to hire people, they got to pay what the market's paying, or they won't be able to hire anyone. Now, if they have market power, that's not true, right? Then they can, within limits, set their wage they're willing to pay.
And in this situation, actually, minimum wage is actually a way to protect against what the companies are trying to.
Yeah, that's right. So minimum
Right,
wage
yeah.
actually makes them employ more people. It's counterintuitive.
Okay.
It's one of the most results in economics are straightforward. That's one that's.
So really, before you apply
makes
any
students
supply
scratch their
demand,
heads,
right?
yeah.
You need to think about which kind of market do you have. Do you have free market without restrictions? Do you have like monopoly? Do you have something in between?
Yeah, and with respect to the labor market, this is a crude way of characterizing the labor market, but I think it's approximately right. If you look at cities, big cities, Minneapolis, Chicago, there's immense competition for workers there.
Mm-hmm.
And that's because there's just tons of employment. And so what we tend to see there is the market power, the best we can measure it, which is by no means perfect, tends to be weak there. And so, the market power of firms is not overly strong, which means kind of competitive markets are likely setting the prices there. But if you go into rural areas, then you're talking about there's a couple companies that are employing everybody in the town. And then you no longer have this kind of truly competitive market anymore. You have firms that can set their wages.
Yeah, it's more like
And
you
they
work
can-
or out,
You can manipulate the worker, right? You're paying them less than you should.
and they don't have other choices, so they have
That's
to
right. That's right.
come here and work or just be laid off.
Exactly. And so there are some economists that think that is a serious concern. Others think we're not measuring it right, and so there's some debate about that. But nevertheless, I think that's an important part of this.
So do you feel like for minimum wage, instead of doing like a one shot, everybody in the state, this is the case, or should we actually be more differentiated depending on we need to study the market? And then for big cities or small cities, we should have a different, roughly like a flexibility.
I think if I were king and I could just do whatever, I would take the minimum wage that we first instituted. I would adjust it for inflation. I would set it at that value, and I would index it to inflation from here on after, and never talk about it again.
Same number all the time,
Well,
basically.
but-
Not just
but
the
going-
inflation.
going
yeah.
up with,
inflation.
prices.
Yeah.
It's a political lightning rod, and at the end of the day, for people that think that minimum wage is some way to, I think, alleviate poverty, I think that the research on that is not encouraging.
So
That's the way to do it.
So basically, we're exaggerating kind of like how important minimum wage is.
I think so. Yeah,
Okay.
I think and it's because it's so. What do we know about it? All right. So the employment effects are not clear. Let's just say it's a wash. Okay. And wages go up. Okay. So maybe there's a gain overall there, but we also know that firms raise prices when minimum wages go up. Okay. So if take your wife's business, if she had to hire a worker, and she had to double the pay of that worker, she's probably going to raise her prices.
Yep.
Okay, so that's kind of a basic thing that you'd expect. And economists have demonstrated that with respect to, say, food and clothing. And those are interesting because those are necessity items. We're not talking about luxury
Cars
automobiles, right?
or-
We're
yeah,
talking about stuff that everybody consumes. And in addition, there's also evidence that higher minimum wages speed up automation.
Oh, yeah.
And so I think that's...
I see it in McDonald's.
right, well,
right
so,
away.
So the question is, when does McDonald's, Wendy's, whoever, what wage is it that they finally say, okay, let's make this investment in these burger-making machines. This is too expensive.
That's the marginal replacing price. Right?
Yeah, so what is that price? I don't know what that wage is. My guess is it'll be $15 an hour in some areas.
Okay.
Obviously in New York City, a $15 minimum wage is... Firms are probably not going to react at all to that because they're already paying more than that anyway. But if you move into some rural areas in Wisconsin or Minnesota or in the South or where wages tend to be lower anyway, I think there'd be some problems. And so I guess you can kind of gather that I'm not, a huge supporter of minimum wage. I think we need a wage floor to sort of put a check on
Exploit.
on people that I don't think most firms, well, maybe some are, but I don't know, but I guess I don't get the feeling that is dramatically widespread. I think firms are underpaying people, but they're underpaying people because they can, I guess.
Yeah.
So I guess I just don't see this as a real welfare-enhancing policy.
I see.
I think on net, it probably raises welfare a little bit, but there's harm, right?
Yeah, and we're talking about 3% of the population here, so it's a percent, but not such a big percent, right?
Yeah. So what I would say, rather than just trash that, what would you do instead? I think one of the things that I've felt for a long time and is expansion of already existing policies. Like there's a policy called the Earned Income Tax Credit, short for EITC.
EITC. Okay.
Yeah, Earned Income Tax Credit, and basically the Earned Income Tax Credit came out of a variety of different welfare reforms over time. So the first welfare program in the United States was a cash grant.
Uh-huh.
So you only got the money if you didn't work at all. If you worked an hour, you forfeited the whole cash grant, and so the incentives were horrible for that, right? So I mean, especially if you couldn't earn a good wage. I mean, you'd be almost crazy to work and make less instead of not work and make more, right?
Yeah,
So the incentives, people can criticize people that do that all they want, but the incentives were set up by the government, and they were perverse. And then there have been reforms to that to try to encourage work, but they kept not getting it right. I think it's because they didn't understand the economics of it very well. But then, I don't know the exact year. I think it's probably in the 80s, 86 probably, when we first started the Earned Income Tax Credit. And basically what that is a wage subsidy. So, for example, the max benefit that you can get, at least the last I checked, was 40% wage subsidy. And so let's say you made $10 an hour. That meant that your net wage was effectively $14 an hour.
Oh, okay.
So the attractive thing of this is that, one, you unambiguously raise wages for people that are working. Okay, with the minimum wage, you might lose your job, okay? Or two, you might have your hours cut back. There's no guarantee that, I mean, you know what I'm saying? Like if we raise your wage to $10 an hour, but then I cut your hours but proportionally more, you're going to have less income.
Yeah.
And so I guess my point is that the minimum wage is not some slam dunk where everybody's going to be better off. On the other hand, Earned Income Tax Credit is, I would say slam dunk, because we have to raise money to pay for it, right? So it means we've got to tax something. Now, I guess the good news about that is one of the great things about the Earned Income Tax Credit has been shown to pull people from out of the labor force into it.
Makes sense.
So
totally makes
instead
sense.
of people that are not working, you raise their wage, and all of a sudden you pull them into the labor force.
Yeah.
And that was celebrated for a long time, and I think...
Are we still doing that?
We still have it, but I think even in Wisconsin, we cut our state program a couple, 3 years ago. I think we should do more with that.
It's simpler to actually implement.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things that I think would help, so the way it works now is that people get a rebate check, like when they file their taxes, and so you get this. And so I think that in some ways that might be a bad thing. Like take a family that's really cash constrained, and all of a sudden they get a $5,000 check.
One time.
Yeah, one time. but
a year.
But I guess what would happen if that $5,000 was trickled to them every month? Then it probably ends up in food and clothing and other things like that. More necessity type items. And if you get a big chunk of money, you might go buy a car, or, and maybe you need a car, maybe that's okay. But I'm just saying, like, but I've always felt like some of these welfare programs ought to have these kind of timely benefits, because a lot of times these families don't have savings, they don't have cash on hand, and so getting to them in a timely fashion would probably help.
It's
them
actually
solve
a
their
better,
problems.
how to say, behavior, almost like a training. It's just like, hey, you gradually get a better income, so you know actually how to change your lifestyle instead of by doing a one-time purchase. Right, so you learn actually how to adapt yourself to a better standard instead of like,
Well, interestingly, I was listening to one of President Obama's economic advisors. His name's Austin Goolsbee. He's at the University of Chicago, and he was doing an interview, and they were asking him about the payroll tax cut that the Obama administration implemented right after the Great Recession. And it was kind of one of the things that they didn't tell people about. Like, it wasn't something that they wanted to advertise. And the reason why they didn't want to advertise is they actually wanted people not to know that they got it, so they would spend it. Because the lesson from the previous round of tax cuts during the Bush administration, everybody got, a $300 check or $600 check if you had kids. I forget the allotments, but people saved them.
Huh. Yeah.
And as a result, it didn't get into the economy.
You want that to stimulate all these kind of economic activities, right?
That's right. You want people to go out and spend it. And it turns out if you leak it out to them in $40, $50 increments, they don't notice it and they spend it.
Psychological, huh?
Yeah. That policy was actually from behavioral economics, which is,
psychological.
It's an interface between psychology and economics.
That's kind of a big topic right now. It's like a lot of people doing research in that thing.
No, it's an exciting area, and I think we learned a lot from those insights.
Interesting.
And how design. I mean, the great thing about behavioral economics is what they've shown. That the most powerful thing to me is the way you set something up can actually influence people's choices.
So you're paying the same money, just change the time, change the scale, change the way you talk about it.
Yeah.
That will actually have a much different impact.
Or you opt people into things instead of making them opt in. So the great example is the organ donation, right? Like over in Europe, there's some countries that you're opted in to donate your organs. And in order to not give your organs, you have to opt out at the DMV when you fill out the form to get your license.
So people tend to actually, even if it's minimum amount of work, so if I have to do minimum amount of work in order to do that, I would treat it more seriously.
Yeah.
Right. And then most of the time, that thing just goes on unnoticed.
Yeah. So you end up. In some ways, these things are hard. It's like you.
Same thing, right? When you subscribe to like Amazon Prime or something, like do you every month you re-enroll, or actually you just have this, you cancel unless you want to do it. Like we do that. We know those kind of tricks all the time, right? Yeah.
Yeah. So just.
We should do that in our teaching too.
Right.
I don't know. I'm just kind of thinking like your grade, like you assume something, and then once you don't want that grade or your grade goes down, you just need to do something extra. Otherwise, you're always in this category or something.
Yeah. So they've even shown like in school lunchrooms, like putting vegetables at higher level actually induces kids to choose vegetables and not the So just and that's a pretty I think that's the insight from behavioral economics is there's little things you can do that seem to be almost trivial, that actually have a big effect on decision making, but they're cheap. And so I think that's been an enormous contribution. I don't think that enough is being done with that. I think
it's relatively new,
It seems like in Europe they've been a little bit more interested in adopting the insights from behavioral economics and trying so-called nudges.
Because if you put these two together, right, like psychology and economics, they have totally different way of doing research.
Yes.
Right. So that's why, like, probably if you want to do that, you need to adopt those kind of methodologies or experiments you have in psychology into economics. And think about the scale of economics. You cannot conduct a study with like 20 people in the room, right? So I can see the exciting part about this.
There a lot of the behavioral economics research and probably psychology too is centered on classroom experiments and some I don't have any objection to those kind of studies, but I also always wonder, especially for economic research, like, is that can we say that that's what would happen, out there?
Because you have so many factors, right?
Market,
yeah,
right.
Which part you were born, all these kind of things are the factors that economic people actually care about. Yeah. But now you basically just totally get rid of that, right?
Yeah. So.
With the internet,
so lab studies are useful, but they're not necessarily a substitute for study of survey data or administrative data. I do a lot of field experiments too, so I like to actually do field experiments out in the real world where nobody knows I'm messing around with things, because I guess my view is we're seeing people how they really behave.
Yeah.
In a real setting where real decisions are being made. And to me, that's a little more powerful than a classroom experiment with college students.
They're already a biased group.
I guess when I think about methodology, though, I think about, like, I want to do the thing that I need to do to answer the question I want to ask. And so whether that's download some survey data and use, regression analysis or whatever tools, or run a classroom experiment or run a field experiment, whatever it might be, I think each question probably needs a different tool.
Okay. Interesting.
Well, some things you can't study in the lab, right? So for example, if you wanted to look at the effect of teenage pregnancy on later outcomes in adulthood, we can't really do a randomized experiment with that.
The time scale and everything.
Well, that and the ethics of.
Yeah. There are certain things you just cannot. Yeah.
So I picked that as a provocative example of like we just can't do that study in a lab or in the field or in any way. So we got to try to look for some way to study that question, and we can't do it with experimental methods. We'd have to use our more traditional observational data and all the problems that come with that.
Interesting. Yeah, but one of the discussion actually triggered one of the idea I always had, because I only know a little bit about economics, but it seems to me like, just back to the AI thing, right?
Yeah, sure.
So you have supply demand, and whenever people buy stuff, they basically inspires more production, and then more production ends up paying people more, and then they end up buying more. So this is almost like a healthy cycle. They keep going to make the economy grow. But now with the automation, if you can replace people by robots, so people buy, and more production, and then more production leads to more robots, and it seems like the cycle is broken because that thing doesn't go back to people. And what I'm wondering is just like, this seems like the traditional method or mindset won't work, but the companies still actually make a lot of money. That doesn't go to the people, which in terms of wage. And then I started actually read a little bit about the statistics. It's more about in GDP, the capital gain proportion is starting to actually, dominate the part about wage gain. Like our wage hasn't been raised significantly for a long, long time.
Right.
So is this like a valid observation, or what's your take on that?
Look, I think, as I've sort of alluded before, I think that there are some concerns, with respect to these various technologies completely and eliminating work. Like I said, I think it depends on whether the technology, or whatever we want to call it, whether it generates new tasks for those workers that were displaced, or just completely new tasks that we didn't even see coming. So, new
so
stuff.
It's still the bifurcation.
Yeah. So and again, I think there's plenty to be concerned about there, but things can change quickly. I mean, look at the past. A lot of people thought in the 80s that Japan would end up being the world power, and everybody be running
just
way
happening in
behind
one
it.
day.
And then it didn't end up that way. So I mean, I guess I always like to throw that out there, that nobody really knows what's going to happen in the future.
Okay.
And that some innovation of some kind could change everything.
So just wait and see what's going to happen.
Well, I think we ought to be. I mean, it's a little bit like climate change. I don't know that we should wait and see. I think I'm for a proactive approach. We should be thinking carefully about what to do if work does go away. I think that there's plenty of work. I think we could have a little bit of skill problem. I think there's some of that now, but I don't like to overemphasize that, because I do think, in Wisconsin, a lot of firms have said they can't find workers, to work for them. And, while that may be true, if you also look at wages in Wisconsin, they've also been pretty flat over time. And even if you look at the trades, people working in construction or whatever, their wages are pretty flat in Wisconsin, and even in the La Crosse area. So I've got data down to that disaggregated level. And
which is surprising to me, because I actually talked with a guy from Seven River Alliance. Basically, their organization to say we're going to create 12,000 more job here in La Crosse, but the labor force here is actually not going to increase at all for the next 10 years. So we basically are going to face a situation that we cannot find people to hire.
Yeah, I think so. It depends on what kind of workers people are looking for. I've talked to a few employers and suggested kind of teenage internship programs as a way to, because young people, they may not know that these careers are out there. That's certainly not my cup of tea, is to be a plumber or something like that. But that's not to say that it's someone else. We need people to do those kind of jobs, and I kind of feel like maybe students aren't being exposed to those things, or they're not knowledgeable about.
That's actually a question I ask my friends, like, do you have any questions you can ask? She actually mentioned a very interesting thing, is like she works for a Germany company.
Okay.
And in Germany, they have something called like an apprenticeship program.
Yes.
So are you suggesting like this can be a good thing?
Oh, yeah, I definitely think so. I mean, so I think firms, if you're in a environment where you're having a hard time finding workers, the first thing I would ask as a labor economist is, have you raised the wage rate? And I know the answer to that because I've seen the data, and the answer is no. So that's the first thing that's not been tried to attract workers. Now, that said, though, that's not instantaneous. If I just raise the wage today, doesn't mean all of a sudden a bunch of electricians are going to show up at my door ready to take a job, because you don't make an electrician overnight. You don't make an engineer overnight, right? You get the idea. So it takes time to make this happen, and that's why, actually, I think that the best advice is to probably start recruiting these people
at a younger age.
Yeah, I mean, many young people that are thinking about those kind of tracks are probably available to work a full-time job all summer, and you teach them how to do the job. And
totally makes sense. Because I see young people like work at McDonald's. Probably not so exciting if you're a cashier there. You seem like, I need to go to college. I don't like this job. But if you're actually working with the adults, doing some serious stuff, it's just like come here, help, and watch for 2 years. After that, you probably start to develop those kind of respect, especially respect towards adults.
Right.
And good relationships and everything. Yeah.
Yes, I don't know. I do some research on internships, and it's tilted more towards the college students that I and you teach, but it still extends to other kinds of situations.
Those kind of like the internship programs for high school or even younger kids right now.
They do exist. But again, I don't have a good sense for how prevalent it is. If you just take, say, the La Crosse area, I really don't know have any sense.
What about the whole nation? It's not a common thing to see.
No, I don't think. I think this is underutilized, and it's probably this would be a pretty inexpensive way to recruit too.
Compared to everybody go to college, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
Okay. That's great.
Well, I mean, the bottom line is, some people belong. Some students, I'm talking about young people. Some people belong here, and unfortunately, some people don't.
Yep.
And it may be even more unfortunate is some people don't come here that should.
Yeah.
So I think we've got those.
We create those kind of tensions between the teacher and students towards the university and all this stuff. It's just like, it's a mismatch.
We do have some inefficiency there. I think there's no question. We have people going here that probably shouldn't be, people that aren't that should be.
But what are the alternatives, right, for those people? Yeah.
Well, I think, the Susan Donarski, who's an economics professor at University of Michigan, they recently did a huge experiment, and I don't know how they got this thing together, but basically got the University of Michigan to give full tuition payments to these high-achieving students in sort of like rural areas or underprivileged environments. And so they actually targeted the people. They found the best and brightest that may have went to the community college in that area, and they offered them full rides to Michigan. And they did it a number of ways. They sent them a packet. They had the principal talk to them. They had other people talk to them about going to Michigan. And they had an enormous effect. I forget, I'm not going to quote the statistics because I'll misquote them, but it was a very large effect at getting those people that wouldn't have otherwise gone to Michigan to go to that flagship school.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think that I guess to answer your question, I think there's a scope for reaching those really high achieving students that maybe think they don't belong at a place like Michigan, or in our case, Madison or UWL or wherever. And so I think that's a but again, you got to have funds. I mean, that's not free, but I think that's the kind of thing that's required to tap into talent that may not be realized elsewhere or otherwise.
It's actually, I don't know, with the boost of technology, like the internet, like those kind of, because I just talked with one of my students, like you can develop some kind of algorithms which match the students with the teacher at some school. That's the algorithm they already sell, right? If you think that you can do that, actually, with the technology of the internet provides, you can not easily, but you can design something towards that goal to match people to the right place. No matter you're like highly talented, or even just like you don't want to go to college, but you haven't heard about those kind of opportunities before.
Right.
Okay. That's pretty cool. Yeah. Let's talk a little bit about. I noticed on your website you did a lot of research on divorce-related research perhaps from an economic point of view.
Yeah.
Can you elaborate on that? What's going on? What's the trend?
Well, I would say that's sort of an area that I've kind of left behind,
Mm-hmm.
and I can share a little bit about that transition. I heard an economist say once that you should write about the economy, not about the economic literature.
Okay.
And that kind of hit me because I think what I was taught as a graduate student was to make these kind of contributions to literature. That was always kind of the focus. Like, what's your contribution to the studies here? And that is, after all, what we're doing. But when I heard that quote, it's sort of a head snapper for me. I was like, these questions about, investment in children in response to, say, child custody reform.
Uh-huh.
These are important questions, I think. But if I ask myself, is it more important than the unemployment crisis that we were experiencing in the Great Recession? The answer was no.
Mm-hmm.
How do we figure out how to place college graduates in good, high-quality first jobs? That's probably more important. Yeah, so it's a value judgment on my part on what's important, of course. But when I made that switch, I think my research was more impactful because I think that's what people are looking for.
Yeah.
They were like, this is the problem we're having now.
Yeah.
What are people saying about it now? But if I'm writing about something that happened in the 80s, I'm not saying you can't learn anything from that. That's still a useful exercise, but it may not be what they need to know at the time.
Yeah, so is it fair for me to say like you're more goal-oriented?
Yeah, well, I guess
You
I'm
wanna see the impact,
more
right?
impact. I guess and that comes with getting tenure
Yeah.
and not having to sweat that, etc. Those kind of things that come with it. Now I can take my time.
And priorities.
Yeah, and I the couple studies I'm working on now, I've worked on them for over 3 or 4 years, and they're almost done.
Oh, okay. Would you like to talk a little bit?
Well, I can, but I could answer your question first about divorce and things like that.
Okay, yeah. Let's save it for later. Yep.
Yeah, sure. I'd be happy to talk about that. But so I started out. My dissertation was over economics of the family, and so this was I got interested in the work of a guy named Gary Becker. Gary Becker won a Nobel Prize in '91. He passed away just a couple of years ago. He was actually teaching in the semester that he passed away, so he was going to work until the end. He was well in his maybe upper 80s, I guess. But he was a very influential economist. So he's the one that sort of paved the way to look at stuff that was not prices, unemployment, inflation. Kind of what I call meat and potatoes economics.
Okay.
And so he started saying, well, economists can study discrimination because if you discriminate, it's costly. And so he put a lot of social problems, which I was interested in as an undergraduate. I actually didn't find inflation and unemployment and supply-demand diagrams very interesting as an undergraduate. I appreciate that stuff now. I understand its importance, but as an undergraduate student, I thought it was just snooze, totally boring stuff.
Yeah.
I'm super passionate about it now, but
So people listening to this, if you happen to be a journalist student, just so you're not alone. Yeah. But you can still become a professor later.
That's right.
Yeah.
That's right. So one of the books he wrote was called A Treatise on the Family, and that sort of opened economic analysis up to marriage and divorce. And one of the things that I first got interested in was investments in children, and in particular how family law, changes in family law, affected those investments. And so one of the studies that I did.
So, if you don't mind, when you say investment, do you mean financial investment, or this counts for care, time?
It's a good question.
Yeah.
So turns out in a lot of publicly available data sources, it's hard to find good investments as some verifiable investment. And so the measure that we used was private school.
Okay.
Because we knew that at least there'd be some expense.
Significant. Significant.
Right.
expense.
So that was the logic in choosing that. Obviously, time investment is probably something of interest. We didn't have information on that, so you kind of,
I can see how hard it is.
Yeah. Just trying to find the variable you want is not always possible with survey data or administrative data. And so, so to give you some backdrop, states across the U.S., beginning in the 70s, but mostly in the 80s, adopted provisions that preferred joint custody arrangements upon divorce. So if couples get divorced, courts had a stated preference that we're going to do a 50-50 split with the kids, unless you bring it to court and there's maybe some reason, right, one parent gets, so forth. So it was a way for the court to say, there's a lot of divorce going on, we can't handle all these cases, here's our preference. And so if we can do this, this is what we're going to do. So you guys bargain privately to try to come up with this solution, or otherwise this is what we're going to do unless we just can't justify it. Mm-hmm. So the staggered timing of that, we look at that and we basically find that people invest less in their kids in states. But what's interesting about our study is it's a forward-looking thing. So we're looking at couples that are still married.
Okay.
So the sample is households that are intact, and we're looking at a law that affects the division of children upon divorce and how that affects within marriage investment in kids, and we find that there's less of it. Mm-hmm. And there also is a positive effect on women's labor supply, negative effect on men's. Mm-hmm. So, and if you think about who benefits from joint custody relative to the standard before, which was maternal preference, it's fathers. And so there's a class of models in economics. They're called bargaining models. You may have heard of Nash bargaining. So those models predict this kind of threat point. There's this external threat point, and when that's affected, say by this law, it affects the distribution of resources within families, and we find that it ends up harming kids.
Let's say equilibrium under the different law.
Yeah.
Because you interfere basically with the game.
Yeah, that's right. Yeah. Yeah, you tilt the game. Mm-hmm. The power and the balance of power in the game is tilted to the dad.
Yeah.
And it turns out that's not good for kids, at least in our example. But I would also say from reading the literature, also true in developing countries. And so this kind of goes back to
the same conclusion you just had.
Yeah.
It's true for the
Yeah. So and it kind of relates back to something we were talking about before with targeting. I mentioned that targeting the most disadvantaged would generate the biggest gain.
Yeah.
It's a similar point with targeting family members with income. And so there's some, I forget the countries, but there's several developing countries that have these programs that target moms. And so they actually give moms money.
Okay.
And what they find is when they give moms money versus giving dads money, moms spend it on education and healthcare. And dads don't. Yeah. They spend it on themselves.
Yeah.
I think you're a dad and I'm a dad. This is not good for dads necessarily, but that's nevertheless the evidence is that, and so a lot of those programs really focus on targeting moms with the ultimate goal of that ending up helping kids get more education, better health, and then hopefully lead to better welfare of that country in general.
It's good to know, yeah. I can see a big impact there, but again, we're having priority here and see like where we want to direct our most resources to. Right?
Yeah, no. I don't mean to trivialize it. For me, I kind of felt like
if that study,
yeah. Well, I was really interested in the things that this is when I was launching all of this research. We were in the middle of the Great Recession, or still its aftermath. I guess the Great Recession was technically over, but it really wasn't over for most people.
When was that?
I guess we launched this study in probably 2010, something like that. So things were still bad. And so we were interested in studying unemployment, and we were interested in looking at college graduates. Is there discrimination in the labor market for recent college graduates? There is. All these kind of things we're interested in studying. That's the good thing about field experiments is that it's versus say using secondary data in economics is that right now I can get data from 2017 from the census website, but I can't get it for the labor market right now. I can get the stuff that Bureau of Labor Statistics publishes each month or whatever, but I don't really have an analytical data set to work with that's real time. But when you collect your own data, that's as close as you can get to having, especially if you do a field experiment, you can have as close to real-time data as you can get. And if you're good at research design, right, you can use randomization and then ultimately get causal effects, which is ultimately what economists are after.
Yeah. student can be involved in this kind of process too, right? So they can learn a lot through this process.
Actually, the first labor market experiment I did, I had an undergraduate student with me on the project. His name's Adam Pugh, and he ended up publishing he was as an author on 3 of the papers with me. And
Beautiful.
I was really impressed by him. I mean, we had this idea, and he was one of my best students. And I said, "You're interested in helping?" He said, "Sure." And I said, "We need to figure out how to use this program to randomly generate these resumes." And he went and taught himself Python, and it was really amazing, actually, for an undergraduate to take that much initiative and just run with it. And that's why his names are on the papers. Without him, they wouldn't have happened.
Where is he right now?
Well, I think he's working in Minneapolis. He has since got a master's degree in finance from Berkeley, and so he's done really well for himself. And
nice.
I'm still trying to recruit him back to economics, but we'll see.
Yeah, he will see.
Yeah, he'll come around.
Yeah,
it takes a while.
Okay. So you also mentioned when we try to talk through email, like you're interested in immigrants.
Well, yeah,
have you done any study on that, or actually you're just like interested?
Well, I think I'm just interested. I try to keep up with labor economics in general, and I mean it's kind of hard right now with the political environment that we're in not to think about immigrants and international trade, both of those two things. And I think a lot of people don't really know the evidence very, very well on immigration, and for the most part, what we see is that there's not much of a disemployment effect from immigrants. Okay. And so it's not like immigrants are flowing in and leaving, Americans vastly unemployed. I think there's probably a little bit of evidence there's some wage effects, right? So maybe influx of maybe lower educated immigrants maybe puts some downward pressure on low education native wages in the United States, but that's about the extent of it. I guess I would highlight that, with respect to immigrants, we've had some people that have come here as immigrants have made huge contributions to our society. I mean, I think the greatest example is the Google dude, right? Syrian refugee, and I think we're clearly better off with him than without him. And there's thousands of other examples of this. In fact, there's a lot of studies that look at patents in economics and where they measure innovation rates, patents, and it turns out immigrants are more likely to generate those innovations measured by patents than natives. And so I think the rhetoric about immigration is unfortunate and misleading, I think.
So we kind of need to actually see the immigrants from 2 ways. One is that more the higher educated, basically the elite class who came to this country making huge contributions. Yeah. And actually President Donald Trump is actually trying to get a new kind of policy to just we need to actually almost put a score on people. It's like, hey, if you are going to make a contribution, you're not coming here to rely on the social benefits or anything, then we'll allow you in. Right. So that's more of the elite. So more from the lower end immigrant in labor market. And what you just said is just like there's no significant evidence to show anything.
I think that there are modest effects. I mean, the rhetoric doesn't quite match the evidence, right? The idea that people are stealing our jobs, I think, is just not really a thing. I mean, does it happen a little bit? Probably, I guess. But I mean, it's. I think it's overblown, and I gotta be frank. I think it's kind of fear mongering. Anytime things are not good, people always look for something to blame. Yeah. And so this time around.
And this is the easiest thing to blame.
Well, trade with China. Yeah. And immigration. I mean, these are the culprits. But the thing that we've been talking the most about here is probably the thing that needs the most attention, which is the technological advances. That's something that needs to be paid attention to, because if it is completely just labor eliminating, and that's all that's happening, that's probably not good.
And probably if it happens, it's going to happen really fast.
It could, yeah. But the attention is not really on that. It's on trade with China. Yeah,
that's part of the reason I got drawn to Andrew Yang, because he's actually tackled that problem right away. Just like, hey, automation is actually the enemy. Yeah. Not immigrants, not China, not anything.
I would say automation is Potentially.
So,
well, let me put this a bit differently. Certain types of automation are the enemy. I guess that's my read of the evidence, is that some of that's good. Some of that's good not to have to do certain tasks, right? I mean, you can.
I mean, it can empower an individual
that's right.
to do certain kind of stuff. The productivity side. Right?
That's exactly right. And so if that's what's happening, that's not necessarily a problem. But if that's not the thing that's happening, if it's just completely just eliminating work and not really giving any more productivity, then we got a problem. But the focus on China, I think, is some of it is warranted. Like the intellectual property issues are warranted, but that was the point of the Trans-Pacific Partnership, or at least a key feature of it was for the United States and other Pacific Rim countries to collectively unite. And to get China to adhere to the same norms with, intellectual property.
Yeah, basically China is new to the groove. We don't even know how to play this game, right? We need to be taught.
Well, I think that China might be a little more savvy than you're giving them credit for. I think that.
At the first.
Well,
now I think
Well, so the trade war. We're getting a little bit political here, so I don't know how far I want to go down this path. I guess we can say what we want to.
But you. I have no idea how much I should go on politics. Yeah.
Well, I guess. What do I care? But I guess I would say that, that TPP, Trans-Pacific Partnership, was the right approach. The labeling of China as a currency manipulator, completely misguided. If anything, China's manipulating its currency in the other way. That actually works against running a big trade deficit with them. So it's kind of difficult to say that they're trying to manipulate their currency to take advantage of us when they're actually going in the opposite direction that would allow them to take advantage of us. So that was, in my view, a low moment for the U.S. Treasury was to make that claim when there's really no evidence that that's what's happening. It's the opposite, actually, the evidence is. But trade wars are foolish, I think.
Our economic.
Yeah. I don't know anybody that's
you prefer
saying
competitive market all the time, so.
Well, that's not to say that there's not some harm from competitive markets and things like that.
Yeah, in general.
Tariff. What would an economist say is going to happen with tariffs? Okay, you put a tariff on steel. Let's say we produce more steel here. The first thing I'll say is that that's going to be inefficiently produced because it can be produced cheaper somewhere else.
High cost.
Yeah. So we're going to produce it, sure, but we're going to do so at a higher cost. And that's going to ultimately lead to higher prices. And then everybody that uses steel to make their output, whether it's an automobile manufacturer, somebody making heavy equipment, building a building, whatever, they're going to incur higher input costs. And the price of a car is going to go up. That means fewer cars are going to be sold by salespeople, etc. There's kind of ripple effects from this type of thing. So I just think tariffs are not that would not have been my approach, is to do it this way. And the Chinese, I will fudge these numbers a bit, but, when you think about our consumption of their output, they want to trade with us, but it's also not overly consequential if they don't. For example, after some of the early rounds of the tariffs, soybean demand from China, from buying from U.S. farmers, fell like 97%. Dramatic.
That's crazy.
Crazy drop.
Yeah.
That's almost unbelievable. I had to double take to look at the statistic because that's such a large effect that I almost didn't believe it. Are they? They're not buying soybeans. No, they're buying
from Brazil.
Brazil mowed a rainforest down. So there's other implications here too that go beyond just prices and stuff. I mean, if Brazil mows the rainforest down to plant soybeans, that's probably not good either.
Yeah.
For a different reasons.
Yeah.
So I think that I'll be blunt. I think that the president's views on trade and what to do about problems with trade is very uninformed.
At least from economic.
Yeah.
Point of view.
Yeah.
So we have multiple sides when you make policies or anything or decisions, right? Yeah.
Sure. I mean, the economics here are pretty clear and pretty well agreed upon. There's some shades of gray here and there on certain things, but for the most part, nobody would say that a trade war is a good thing for us to engage in. And I would add to this, and this is, I think, not a trivial point, is we have political risks in this country. So at a minimum, Donald Trump will be president for another term, and that's it. The leader of China will likely be in power until he's just not anymore. And so I think that matters too. The Chinese have to know that there's an end to the Trump administration.
Yeah.
And that has to affect their bargaining position. And it should affect ours, knowing that there may not be an end to that regime.
Yeah.
And we should approach it differently. That's where I think there were just some really predictable things that happened that could have been entirely avoided.
Yeah, that's one thing I kind of don't understand about, like, I won't say like don't understand, it's just like I feel weird about the system here. It's just like, so if you, at most a president can stay here, I'm totally blind in politics, right? I don't understand a thing. But if it's only 8 years of period in China, because we have been there for 5,000 years, every time we plan, we say, hey, plan for 200 years, we plan for like at least 50 years or something like that. You will know the policy is going to be consistent.
Yeah.
As long as the people are still in power and people are okay with it, and if you are like end up being not a good leader, we certainly have our way to actually overthrow the whole government. It happens like at least 20 times. It's like the whole country is going against one empire. So yeah, we're kind of in this kind of casual way, just like we sit there and wait 100 years and see what happens.
Yeah, right.
You know, but yeah, especially if you have those kind of elections going on and everything, it seems like there are so many things just become a chip or a card to play at this election game.
Yeah.
For us, it's just like, I feel like there's a lot of entropy, which is unnecessary if things are different.
Right. Oh, I mean, I think, look at our politics are completely broken in the country, I think.
And now?
Yeah, it's completely horrific.
Okay.
I've been, I was even following this when I was in high school. I've always been interested in sort of public policy issues and stuff like that, and this is way worse than certainly in my lifetime have ever seen it. And in talking to my parents, they've never seen anything like this.
What's your biggest concern here about this kind of system?
I would say that it's mostly on the conservative side, but it's on the Democratic side too, and that's just the aversion to evidence. Or the rejection
to listen.
just like the stuff we're talking about with trade, and I can explain to most people why a trade war is not a good idea, and at the end of our conversation, I'm like, yeah, it's probably not a good idea. But at the end of the day, try telling that to our president. So we could have a Nobel Prize winning trade economist like Paul Krugman, which he tends to lean to the left pretty significantly, but nevertheless, he's a expert at international trade. I mean, this is why he won the Nobel Prize, with his contributions to that field. But I'm not in any way that the president would listen to anything he had to say, and I'm also not convinced that anybody on either side of the aisle would listen to anything that anybody really had to say. There's a few people up there, I think, that are serious about their job, but unfortunately, I think some of them are not very serious. Or they have such a strong agenda, and anything that's against that agenda, they don't want to even entertain.
So it's almost like I'm doing this one way or the other, or at whatever cost.
Yeah.
Right? Okay.
Well, I mean, this is a little bit on the political science side, but I mean, just the fact that the Congress won't put bills on the president's desk for him to either sign or veto is worrisome to me. They're almost taking orders from the president of what laws to write, and that's not the point. That's not what they're supposed to do. So that's a concern there.
Yeah.
But I also think it's this disdain for evidence, experts. This was not true in the Obama administration, and I think it was really true in the George Bush. They had experts around them everywhere. You could quibble about certain appointments, but I think when you look now at the Trump administration, I can't say that, and I won't comment on everybody in the administration, but the economic people. I mean, his Council of Economic Advisors head is not even an economist. He was a TV personality. And so there's a lot of, and his international trade expert has never written on international trade.
Huh.
So that's concerning, right? I mean, that alone. I mean, sure, there are conservatives that know about international trade.
Yeah. It doesn't matter which side you're on. You can pick the people who knows their stuff there.
Yes.
Right. That's basically the common here. Yeah.
That's my point. Is that's the expert seems to have the interest in listening to the expert is sort of gone away, or it's dormant for now. Hopefully that comes back.
Yeah. What I observe here is actually I read some books about this. It's just like before for all the government, people are getting a little bit tired of all this elite class. That's kind of like one reason. Yeah. Like they want to say, hey, I want to get some guy to come here to break the cycle, break the system, and just do things in a new way. It doesn't necessarily like good way or bad way. It's just like
right.
Just make things change a little bit. So yeah, I'm actually interested to see how the system is going to recover, because I said this is right at the point that you're going to see something new coming out. Mm-hmm. If it go back to the old way, probably people won't be happy. If it stay in this one way, probably people won't be happy. So I'm ready to see actually what's the next fundamentally leap in this thing is going to happen.
Right.
Yeah.
No, I think that's a good question. Where do things go from here? I think is.
Yeah, because I have a green card. I'm a foreigner basically, but so it doesn't concern me too much. But it's really nice to see, because I have read so many great stories about the political system here, the political figures here. So like it seems like at every crisis you will always have one or two people showing up at the right time to bring this country to move forward, and because you're like the biggest country in the world, so basically in economics and size and everything, right? So and basically bring all the human being to the next level, because United States problem is not the United States problem anymore. It's just globalization, just make everybody connected.
Well, you make a good point, and I'd like to expound on it a bit, and it's related to that. You hear a lot of right now celebration. The president, for example, will tweet. And almost. So we'll tweet things like, China's hurting from this, and while that may make some people feel good, that actually scares me, because I know that if they go down, somebody else is going to go down, and then when a lot of people start going down, we're going down.
Yeah.
And I think that we should have learned that with the Great Recession, right? This financial crisis, because the whole world went down together and they came back up together. And I think that shows the degree of integration. We are very interdependent, tied at the hip with the rest of the world, and that's just the reality of it. That's not going to change. Yeah. No, you can't tariff your way out of that interdependence that we have.
Interesting. Yeah, for me, it's more of like seeing all these great things had happened during the past like dozens of years. It's just economy seems like miraculously keep going up, and we're expecting that thing to keep going up, while in reality we start to see like probably we hit a ceiling here. We cannot keep that kind of growth anymore, and we haven't actually had this during the 1970s and 80s. So this is actually during the past 30 years we started growing like this.
Right.
Probably people need to start to actually change their mindset to get used to like, what if the economy doesn't grow?
Right.
What if I couldn't find a better job on next month or even next year or even probably for 10 years? I just need to got stuck here and think about how am I going to actually adjust my life and living and everything, right?
Right.
Because I listened to a really interesting podcast, and people started to actually have concerns, even for like professors. Just think about, they already started to describe like the law firms of professors like a Ponzi scheme. Just like one professor has 10 students, they promise all you guys is going to become professors someday, and let's assume you all become professors, and all these 10 each have 10 PhD. All of you guys are going to become professors someday. You keep almost like baiting people with those kind of, I would say, fake hope. But it's a very selective process, right? It's like you go to a law firm, you're assistant. Okay, eventually you will become associate. Once you have that, you will become a partner. But probably from now on, you want to get used to it. Is that like all the 20 people, I know it's a competitive school, you graduated, you're like elite. But probably for the next 40 years, you will be assistant, period.
Right. Yeah, the same thing happened in inner city gangs.
Yeah.
Right, you had the leaders, they rose to the top, and it used to be that
the social ladder,
they'd be at the top, and then they would hand it down to someone else, but the problem was they got to the top and they stayed there, and everybody else stayed poor and risked their lives and different things like that. So it's the same kind of
And so the inequality actually is increasing more and more.
Right.
Well, how much time do we have? We actually almost hit the 2 hours. Would you like to talk a little bit about the research you currently are doing? And
Yeah, absolutely.
if we don't have time, next time we can interview again and try to see what's going on there.
Yeah, sure. So I kind of have, let me talk about my work on internships. Interestingly, just to give you a backstory about how I came to study this, was totally, again, in my theme about luck.
Okay.
So I mentioned before we did this experiment, we're really interested in studying unemployment, right? So the longer you're out of the workforce, does that make it harder for you to get back in, right? We have a fancy phrase for that. It's called negative duration dependence, right? So the longer you're unemployed, the harder it is for you to get a job, and so it's kind of a cycle that feeds itself. And so the longer you're unemployed, the longer you stay unemployed because you have a hard time getting a job. Mm-hmm. So we wanted to test that with a randomized field experiment. Turns out we didn't find any evidence of duration dependence, which was interesting because a lot of people thought that was a thing, and turns out we have found no evidence of it, at least for recent college graduates. But one of the things that we did in the experiment was that on the fake resumes that we sent out to prospective employers, we included randomly, some of them had internship experience, some of them didn't.
Okay.
And so, in full disclosure and honesty, we put that on the resumes to make them look realistic. We weren't really intending on studying that, but that turns out to been a quite influential study.
Do you have a quantification on that?
Well, it's been cited close to 100 times. It was published in 2016, so it's a pretty fast, at least for a new labor economics paper like that.
I'm so more thinking about like how big the impact the internship is going to add to your resume. Yeah, like
for the students.
In terms of numbers, yeah.
Well, so, some context is needed here. So the fictive applicants in our study had been out of school about 3 years.
Okay.
So they had graduated in 2010, and they were applying to jobs in 2013.
No job in between.
There was complicates. The design was kind of complicated there. So some people got a job right out of school, some people didn't.
Okay.
And so that was what allowed us to compare the duration unemployment. But so basically, what we found was the internship that people did in 2009, right? So keep in mind, our fake people, graduated in 2010. They interned in 2009, and it was still raising employment prospects in 2013.
Wow. Before your graduation, you did an intern.
Yeah. Okay. So 4 or 5 years later, you're still getting a return from that relative to people that didn't have that experience.
Okay.
And so that was a pretty sizable effect. And since then, the question that keeps coming up about this, and it's not surprising, is like the paid, unpaid status of internships. And we wanted to try to figure out how can we get at that. Turns out there's no data. The Bureau of Labor Statistics, the census, no one collects information on internships. So this is where we went to using text as data. And so we used ads from a prominent internship website. We used some machine learning, variety of different techniques, and we did so many things in the paper. I won't try to explain everything, but we were really interested in figuring out what makes an internship paid and unpaid, and what what are the correlates of that. And so one of them, not surprisingly, is part-time, full-time. So if internships are full-time, they're practically jobs. There's a super high probability they're. The other thing is, and this came from the machine learning algorithm we use. So the algorithm, what it did is it took the ad text and it grouped the internships into occupation categories, detailed occupation categories. So like chemical engineer, whatever the title of the occupation would be. But it also gave us a score of how well the characteristics of the ad matched the characteristics of the detailed occupation's characteristics.
So probability score?
Yeah, so the higher that is, the more likely it is to be paid. So the intuition there is if it's a lot like a job, you get paid. If it's not like a job, it's more like an educational experience, you don't.
Okay.
But there are other things that are concerning here. So there's a strong link between unemployment in the metropolitan area, and so if the unemployment rates
for college graduates.
Well, yeah, this is just we're looking at it from the firm's perspective.
Okay.
So the observation is the ad,
Mm-hmm.
the internship opening ad that we found online. And so it turns out if unemployment is higher in that region, they're less likely to pay interns.
Oh,
And
that's
so
what you mean by
that could have, and there's a couple interpretations of that. It's not clear what that means. That could mean that firms are taking advantage of the slack in the labor market and saying, well, we can hire interns at no charge.
Mm-hmm.
And so that's one interpretation.
People are desperate to look
Yep.
for jobs.
Yeah, and
So
maybe they're
yeah.
retraining. Maybe they lost their job, and so we can get them cheap. I don't know. It's hard to know what the calculus is.
So
first,
based on your research, what's the one advice you can give to students in La Crosse, like
okay.
about internship?
Well, I think it's a good idea to do them. I think it's good from their perspective too, and I guess I would highlight that. It's a chance to try out a firm,
Mm-hmm.
a job, and I can't think of something worse than to work in a job that you're miserable the rest of your life. I mean, so that's a valuable thing, even if it ends up being a flop,
Mm-hmm.
and you learn, I don't want to do that. That's useful. So I think it also enhances people's resumes. I think it does, and there's a lot of within firm magic. So you intern with firm A, and there's a really high probability that firm A ends up offering you a job.
Yeah.
And
Especially here, yeah, I think.
yeah. I think it's true in general. And so even if you look at some of the national surveys that have been done, and again, interested parties are doing these surveys, so you can take them with a grain of salt. But but if you intern twice with the same firm, the probability of getting a job offer for them is like 90%.
Yeah. Why do they want you the second time, right?
Yeah.
It must mean
Right. That tells
it's
you
already in their
something.
mind.
Well, it tells you something. They want you, but it also tells them something. You want them
Yeah.
because you came back again.
Yeah.
And so I think that they're good. I think that students should they should make sure that they're going to get something out of it.
Mm-hmm.
Not like fetch coffee and get paid 10 an hour. I mean
Typing or
you can make 10 an hour, working at a restaurant or something. Like that to me, if you're fetching
Money is
coffee,
another thing,
so I would try to think about the experience you're going to have. I would want to intern for somebody that was going to teach me something about that company, about the different jobs. And in fact, I mean, if I were thinking of an internship, it would be almost like you would want to give somebody the greatest hits of the company, right?
Yeah.
Like this person does this job does this, and you learn about the full thing. But
Culture, process, environment, everything.
but that said, that doesn't mean that everything's got to be the same, right? There's value to things being different. But
Is there a difference between like the length of the internship? If like intern at a place for a whole year through spring and fall and spring semester, or just like 3 months during the summer? Do you guys differentiate that?
I think, that's hard to do. In fact,
Yeah.
a lot of the ads don't have the information in there. That a lot of times they don't even say when they start.
Oh, okay.
Which
They
is
don't tell you
it's
how
a-
long it is either, right?
Yeah, so we've got these kind of questions in seminars where we give them the paper, and we're just like, I wish we knew, but we can only get what we have in the ad, and we've tried to use that data as well as we can. But in general, I think internships are good for students.
I didn't do the study, but I talked to a lot of employers, like locally, or exactly matches what you just said.
Right.
Yeah, if a student go out and find a job, the first thing and the only thing they're going to ask them, unless there's something else, like why your GPA is so low or something,
Right.
stuff like that, it's always like, what did you do here?
Yeah.
Explain what you did there.
Well, that's something that even in my department, the economics department, that I think a few members of the department have really been pushing for, is that we try to help our students think about how they can use the stuff that they've done in their classes in a job interview.
Yeah.
Like draw on that research project you did in this class
Mm-hmm.
and relate it to something they're asking you. And so I think and I think that anecdotally we've got good comments from students that it played well with the employers. I think that they want to hear those things.
Yeah,
So-
definitely. Yeah, I can tell easily a student who had an internship and who hasn't done anything with your companies before.
Right.
Just looking at the way they say stuff, you have no clue what you're talking about.
Right.
Oh, you know how to present yourself.
Yeah.
That means you got paid to do so for a
Yeah.
while.
Yeah, so I'm very much a pro internship person. I think there's some bad ones, and I think students, what I would say for students here at EWL is they should probably go through career services, because career services there's going to be some vetting.
Yeah.
Not anybody is just they're not going to facilitate internships between just anybody that shows up at the door. They're going to check on this, and I think that's one way to screen out
Personally,
the good ones and the bad ones and that type of thing. So,
when I was doing the interview here, before that actually, back at my school with my PhD, the career service actually helped me to prepare all my interviews and everything. Just like even like how you should dress,
right.
how you should walk in, like even like when I speak, sometimes I use my gesture too much. They say, hey, you want to put your hands down so to not block your face. That's the first time I realized, wow, this is small tips that I never realized. Like, you know, drink water before you actually have the video conference. You don't want to put a cup there and drink half time. It's like, okay. I never noticed that, but that's good to know.
I'm bad at these things, I guess.
Okay.
But I want to say one more thing about the internships. And I guess instead of just commenting on students, I also want to say something about public policy. And so I think...
From the government side?
Yeah. Because I think that what we have learned from the study that should be released, really should have been out some time ago, but any day now, we should be done with the paper. I think the lesson is that we need more internships out there. And I'll say that for a few reasons. One, we also in our study find evidence of discrimination. And one of the things that has been shown sort of time and time again to reduce discrimination is more competition.
Yeah.
So if there's more internships out there, and let's assume we can hold the quality of them constant. Obviously we can't, but if you think about not having to sacrifice quality, if we just had more internships, then firms that discriminate based on characteristic, whether it's gender or whatever, they may end up without an intern if they play that way. And so I think that's, but in addition to more internships, we also need more paid ones, or figure out a way to fund it. Because I think one of the things that concerns me the most about pushing internships is that some people can't do them, especially if they're uncompensated. And you need not be poor to be in that position. You could be from a middle, maybe even middle upper income family and have a hard time selling your labor at zero wage.
I got the same situation with my student, just like you got a really nice paid intern, does what your major does want to do, but you have to pick a subway job simply because you need to support yourself during summer.
Right.
That doesn't make sense at all.
Yeah, so I mean, some of the things that, kind of depends on people's philosophy and what they think about the role of the government. Cash grants to not to firms. You could subsidize firms to do paid internships, or you could
government grants for a student. You find an intern, we pay for that, right?
Yes. Yeah, the room and board, different things like that.
For me, it's almost like as valuable as paying students to do undergraduate research.
Right.
If you are not going to go into academy, right, doing research is actually as important as just go to a company and work there in some professional way. So if we can fund research for $1,000 during the summer, why don't we fund an internship for $1,000 during the summer? And then maybe more companies are willing to actually just say, hey, all I need to do is just give you a room, tell you what to do, and I don't even have to pay a thing. Especially for smaller companies, right?
Yeah. So I think that's exactly the type of thing that needs to be done. I mean, we needed to have access. College students from all kinds of backgrounds should have access to this. If my evidence is still true today, what we basically showed a pretty sizable return to internships. Certainly helps students get jobs. We know that anecdotally. We've got thousands and thousands and thousands and thousands of anecdotes, right, of people interning with firm A and getting a job at firm A. There's all kinds of evidence of that. But this type of evidence that we collected was actually you intern with firm A and it actually helped you get a job at firm B. That's a different thing. That's suggesting that the internship is potentially just making you look more attractive just because it's another line on your resume, or alternatively maybe making you more skilled. But so access to lower income students is important, and I think right now we're not serving that group. So this could perpetuate. The reason why I'm emphasizing that, and I didn't want to leave that out, is that it could perpetuate income inequality.
Yeah.
If the only people that are getting internships are those from better means, and if you get better jobs and higher salaries and whatever else,
and they can usually work at their father's company.
Yeah, or think about most of the internships in the government, the federal government. If you go intern with Elizabeth Warren, it's zero wage.
Yeah.
Who's doing that? Not low-income kids from rural Wisconsin.
Oh, I see.
I think that that's an issue to me anyway. an access issue that needs to be addressed. And you could address it with public policy by somehow increasing the supply of paid internships or doing grants for people that do unpaid ones, whatever. I think that the politics here are hard because most people don't want to give firms money. At least I've heard this from some politicians that I've advocated like giving tax credits to companies that offer paid internships, and the response I got was, well, I don't want to pay them to do something they should do anyway,
which they're not doing.
Yeah, they're not doing it. So
yet honestly encourage.
But if you were to subject, this is a concern I have, is that you would say, well, all internships are jobs and we're subject them to minimum wage. And I think what would happen is you would have fewer internships. And that would go against the policy. It's the same kind of thing. Yeah. It's like, I'm for helping people out that are disadvantaged. No question about it. I don't have any problem at all with that. But I think it matters how you do it. And so I think
behavioral economics. Huh?
What's that?
Behavioral.
Yeah, it does.
Economics. Yeah.
So you could get people higher pay by raising the minimum wage, but you're not going to get everybody higher pay because some people will probably not have a job.
Yeah.
Or in this case, somebody won't have an internship. And so you would potentially leave them worse off with that policy. You just need to. But again, the I guess the attractive thing about minimum wage is that somebody else is paying for it. Right? You're making the firm pay for it, or their consumers. In fact, what most of the evidence suggests is that the consumers of the firm's product end up paying.
So free market actually does it. Doesn't matter you tax the buyer or the seller.
It will work itself out the way it's sort of supposed to be based on the market incentives.
Have you ever tried to sell these ideas to any nonprofit? Because I seem like government, if they want to see evidence, they want to see those kind of things before they actually make a big move on something. Mm-hmm. But I almost feel like this can be a really good idea for any kind of nonprofit, and we have a decent amount of a nonprofit helping students and employers just set up the bridge and make you guys work.
Yeah, that's a great point. I wouldn't say that I'm particularly good at finding those connections. Figuring out how to. I mean, like I guess I'm a number cruncher and sit in my hole, and that's what I do. So I'm not very good at. That said, I'm very open to talking to companies or helping companies design things. I think you could do experiments where you could actually learn something and also maybe achieve your objectives at the same time. I guess I've wanted to do experiments with nonprofits or whoever, but finding people to participate is the challenge.
Yeah, I just figure I do see several nonprofit here just worrying about the local economy and labor market or anything, and they're actually trying to do what they can to make a positive impact. So the thing is just like, hey, just offer us like $5,000 for 2 students during the summer, even though it's small, a few people, but it may show some evidence, right? And then eventually that thing may grow to somewhere.
That's right. Well, I also think that the internship is another way. We were talking before about Wisconsin companies in particular, complaining that they can't find workers. And there's a lot of discussion in this state, and it has been for some time, about brain drain, right? So-called brain drain, right? Where the best and brightest leave Wisconsin, they move to Minneapolis, they move to Chicago, they move to San Diego.
The brain drain thing from West Coast to every single county in the United States,
Yeah, so, there's evidence that that's happening here. And so, I mean, I actually have said this. I served on a panel at Governor Walker's Small Business Summit out in Wausau a couple of years ago, and I said this to the room. It was a room entirely full of business people. I said, if you want to keep people here, I have a map, and it's in my paper, and it shows the internship availability in the United States, at least based on the best proxy we can have from the web, and they're not in Wisconsin.
Oh yeah.
So if you look at Minneapolis, there are far more internships per capita. So this is adjusting for population.
Yeah.
Minneapolis, Chicago, and so I don't think that's a coincidence that many of UWL graduates, UW Eau Claire graduates, UW whatever graduates end up in Chicago and end up in Minneapolis. Yeah. Many of them have interned for companies in Chicago and Minneapolis.
It's crazy.
And they end up working for those companies in Chicago and Minneapolis.
Yeah.
And so, as I told those employers, I said, there's no guarantee here, but if you were to start recruiting UW students and give them internships.
And they're decent students.
Yeah, we have fine students here.
Yeah.
There's no question about it.
Because I just think about my personal experiences, right? I went to Google 2 years ago, and I was sitting in the room, and we got like probably 20 faculty sitting there discussing something, and we need one guy to lead the whole process so that the topic doesn't go off. There was one guy super confident, looks young. I don't know how young he was, and he just there and speak and just say, hey, no guys, we need to do this, and after a while, hi guys, we need to do that. Write everything down, share Google Drives and everything. I thought, wow, you're pretty impressive. I was hired by Google. He said, I'm an intern. I'm like a junior in Pittsburgh University. Well, I said, why are you here? Well, they came to our university. They say, do you want interns? I sign up. They interview me. They want me. They paid for the flight. They paid for the lodging. They paid for everything. I say, well, you have somebody there who's like 20 years old, coordinating all these 40 years old, 50 years old faculties all together, and just try to coach them at the same time. I want to work here if you give me those kind of opportunities, right? It's like I'm not young anymore, but if you give me those kind of things like free food and everything, I want to work here.
Right.
You just need to show me how great your culture is.
But you can show, but that shows how much they value people.
Oh yeah, and tons of money thrown into it.
Well, they know that's where their payoff is getting the best and brightest people they can find.
But the problem here is like, no matter how much money you throw in, you always get the bright people out. You get all the money paid back with no time, right? You got the right candidate. It's worth than much more than anything.
Yeah. There's no question about it. And I think that we got plenty of high quality young people here in the state.
And we do have actually high quality, companies here too.
Right.
Like they're a decent company until you start to know them. You think, well, what do they do? You go inside, wow, this is actually really high tech and exciting and good culture, plus close to home.
Right.
Right. But you just have those kind of bridges. But yeah.
Yeah. So I guess I feel that Wisconsin companies in particular are a little lax on how aggressive they're recruiting and how they're doing it. I think they should be setting up shop in these universities and
old-fashioned way. I think
we have
everybody I talk to is more like old-fashioned way.
Yeah, I mean, I don't know, and a way, and again, reiterate the point. The way to get them in the door, I think, is potentially through an internship program or an apprenticeship type program. Even if you're wanting to hire
high school
carpenters or whatever.
Yeah.
I mean, find them young and teach them.
Let's hope we can see that coming in the coming years.
I hope so.
Okay, thanks for joining us today.
Yeah, no, I enjoyed it.
That was fun. Yeah. Okay.
That's good.